This episode is brought to you by Midwest Night Watchers, found everywhere on your favorite podcast platforms.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Piercing the Veil.
And happy Sunday and happy Father's Day to all you fathers.
Absolutely. Happy Father's Day to everybody.
I think that's just a U.S. thing, right? Or is it a happy Father's Day around the whole world?
Well, I'm sure Hallmark spread it everywhere.
Well, happy Father's Day to all you fathers and happy Sunday.
So today we have Mark Olly back, and we're going to discuss crystal skulls and elongated skulls as pretty much any kind of archaeology discovery of some kind of civilization that left behind crystal skulls and elongated, maybe alien species. I don't know. We'll just have to get into it and see. So it's going to be fun. But I'm glad to see everybody popping in and chat.
Yeah, they are starting to hop in here. I see Demaria, Shelley, old movie fan, Dragonfly, Sober Carper. We got UK in the house. We got Blazer. And let me scroll back. We got Jackie. And Shelley, I already said. I think I got everybody. Welcome in, everyone.
Yeah, welcome. Glad you guys are all here. And we end up doing 2 p.m. our time and 8 p.m. UK time. So it'll work out for our guests. And it turns out to be a really good show. We get both crowds from the US and UK and other areas that are available in the early evening for them and afternoon for us.
Yeah, if you see us at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, more likely we have a UK guest.
It almost sounded like you said poltergeist for a minute.
Guys. Oh, yeah, we can get into that too. Oh my.
So anyway, thank you all for coming, and we'll just go ahead and bring Mark up and get right into it.
Sounds good.
Welcome, Mark.
Yeah, welcome back,
Hi.
Mark.
Yeah, it's Father's Day here too. Hallmark having
okay.
gone all around the world. We get those cards over here.
Oh yeah.
Well, happy Father's Day.
I think Hallmark controls more than we think.
Yeah, we've not joined the dots up yet. I think they're a worldwide, conspiracy.
That's
what
right. So with our last show, we had kind of touched on crystal skulls. So I thought we would come back and do a full show on crystal skulls and see where it goes. I know you have a book out on that.
Yeah, I've got it here. Here we go. I think. Hey, there we are. How's that for high-tech graphics? You see?
Oh yeah.
Bring it in and then bring it out again. There you go.
I like the rainbow effect on the skull.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
There's an interesting story about that because I actually did that as a mock-up. I designed that and I just did it to try and explain to the publisher that I wanted a crystal skull on the outside, casing in a human skull on the inside. And he's like, well, show me. So I sent him that and it ended up on the cover. That's just, it's only the test. It's the test art, but it doesn't matter. Like you say, it's come out all right, I think, in the long run. But available on Amazon. There we go. It's got the advert out of the way.
There you go.
Yes,
I'm sure one of our mods will post your Amazon link and stuff in our chat so everybody can go there if they want to check out your books, peruse them.
All there, yeah.
Well, I guess that's my first question, because I've seen a bunch of different skulls, little ones. You know, you can see them in the stores. Is there a difference, or with the rainbow effect? Some of them have more of a rainbow effect than others.
Yeah, it depends on your definition of a crystal skull. Literally, it's a skull made of crystal. So technically, you could have it made of anything. And clearly, if you have a look at a lot of the crystal shops that are out there, they've got them now in a huge number of different crystals. They're sort of everywhere.
Right.
But to sort of pin it down a little bit, the definition of a true crystal skull, a proper one, is it's nearly always quartz. It's got to be quartz. It doesn't have to be clear quartz. It can be milky white or, you know, smoky or whatever. But as a rule, it's got to be quartz. Second thing is, as a rule, it's got to be handmade. So if it's made by machine, if somebody sat there and just kind of gone, you know what I mean? If they're banging them out like 10 to the dozen, then that's not really what it was all about, you know, back in the day when they were making these things. Another definition, third definition, is it's nice if it's life-sized or bigger. So you could have sort of a child-sized one. The one I've got is kind of round about that size. But the bigger they go, the better, because they're the more substantial ones. So when you've got all those factors, it's quartz, it's handmade, it's life-size, you're beginning to head in the right direction with that. If you can prove some kind of age, if it's got age to it, that's the business. That's what you're looking for. They're the four things that you need to get together to be able to define it. And that definition, I think, was established back in the 1970s. You know, with Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and all this kind of thing that was going on back then. You know, they were actively searching for the skulls, and that's what they were looking for. Now it's gone bonkers. You know, since the turn of the millennium, there are tens of thousands of these machine-made ones out there, and surprisingly few of the original skulls. You know, there's not as many as you think.
Yeah, because that was a big question back then, whether it was actually man-made. You know, was there machine marks? I did all those studies and looked into the crystal skulls to see if they could see any tool marks on them.
Yeah, the benchmark, the absolute benchmark, is the Mitchell Hedges skull, and it's the only one with a separate jawbone, and it's anatomically perfect. And I know a lot of people have said, well, you know, it must be a Victorian fake, and it was, you know, machine polished and blah, blah, etc. But no, I was there when they did the tests back in the 70s and 80s. I was alive then, and I can remember the results coming out very vividly, because when the results came back, they could not find a single tool mark anywhere on that skull.
Wow.
So just on that one basis alone, you know, just on that, you've got to say, no one's going to sit there and spend, you know, a couple of thousand years polishing all the bits off and getting in all the crevices. And, you know, it's nonsense. Nobody does that. It's been made by a method of stone cutting that is as old as the stone cutting we find in places like Egypt and South America. And, you know, it's almost miraculous. They did something with that skull that we can't reproduce. You know, we just can't do it. Besides which, I mean, it must have been a socking great big lump of stone they started with, and they still managed to come out with a skull that was anatomically correct. You know, it's bonkers, absolutely bonkers.
There was speculation about aliens and lasers and all that stuff. You know how that goes. Do you put anything behind it? Do you think it's possible that maybe an alien entity or something carved some of these skulls?
Well, there was a lovely theory at the time. And I'll kind of run you through this one because it really answers it. When they were trying to get together what they imagined to be the Mitchell Hedges skull and 12 other skulls, you know, they thought, well, if we can get them all together, somehow they contain this information and they're going to communicate, you know, a bit like, you know, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you know, they're all going to light up and they're all going to, you know, communicate. And to a certain extent, at that point, science just laughed at that as an idea. They just said, no, that's just not possible. You know, you can't do that. Fast forward to 2013, and in this country, they discovered that they can write data in 5D into glass, which is silica. That is exactly the same material as quartz silica. and they can write it in to such a degree that they can do it bigger and better and longer lasting than any computer that we know. So they're now producing these discs, these glass discs, to write material in. So the end of that tale basically is that yes, these crystals may very well contain data that we can recover back. The only thing is we don't know how. Okay,
right.
That's the problem. So there could be something in there. So it's ceased to be a laughing matter now. You know, nothing happened when they brought the 13 schools together. You know, nothing happened apart from a really nice posy photo shoot. That's all they got out of that. You know, there was no sudden, you know, nothing really crazy happened. But they're not laughing anymore because the actual science behind that does stand up. It does actually stand up to scrutiny, surprisingly.
So how many skulls have actually been brought together at one time? Has there been very many?
Well, back in the 1970s, the photo that you always see used in the sort of the gathering of skulls, there's the Mitchell Hedges one in the middle, and then 12 other life-sized skulls. And if you look at the photo and you kind of go down the photo and then just go one to the left, one of the skulls is here with me now. Here he is. Formerly known as Jason, and he's in that photograph from the 1970s. And he has a very interesting story indeed. He really does. So there he is. He's the one I've got at the moment. I'm not going to say he's mine because I don't think he really belongs to anybody. You know, he belongs to himself. But he's in the photo. You can see him in the photo. He's also in the book. But there we go.
So what's Jason's history? How did you come about having Jason?
It's a very interesting one. When it came to the end of the Second World War, there was an aid worker working with people in the tribal areas of South America. And I don't know if you know this, but the Aztecs and the Mayans never got on. The two empires just hated each other. They never actually settled down together. So the survivors now are Mayans, but they don't have an enormous amount of respect, or they didn't have in the past, for things that were Aztec. So when this guy got to the end of his tenure and he was leaving the village, which I think was in 1947, 48, somewhere like that, the guy in charge of the village elder, came to him and produced this. And when, you know, it's you can see from the face, this is Aztec. The whole style of the front of that, there's no doubt about it. This is an Aztec skull. Also, there's no history of the Mayans actually making this type of life-size human skull. So the elder gave him this and just said, look, for all the work you've done, for all the years you've done it, you can take this back to Europe. So then it finds its way back to the UK. Now, obviously, that tale is an old tale, and the guy that had the skull is getting older. You know, he's clearly not in his prime anymore, and he's not long for this world. So what he decides to do is he passes the skull on to the next best person that he knows to own the skull. So it goes from him to the Masonic Lodge Master. He hands it to the guy in charge of his Freemason lodge. And that Masonic Lodge Master at this point, I mean, the Masons are not particularly young people, but obviously he's considerably younger than the original aid worker was. Anyway, fast forward again another 20 or 30 years, the Lodge Master's getting old, and he's got this, and he's like, what do I do with it? So he hands it to me. I end up with it. So I'm the next owner. So it has got that sort of pedigree. Now, there is a reason why he handed it to me, because he said, right, this story is just what I've been told. It's what the guy told me. You know, is there any evidence to back this up? So I got hold of this as an archaeologist, and I started looking at it very, very closely. And like I say, it's clearly got this Aztec vibe going on, but most importantly to me, and you'll be able to see it as the light reflects off the top of the skull, this surface is handmade. Someone has literally polished the whole of this down from a gigantic block of stone, a little tiny bit at a time. There's no machine marks on it. It's all entirely handmade. The same goes for the eyes and the teeth and everything. It's completely 100% hand carved. Nobody's going to do that now. You know, nowadays they just wouldn't bother. The other side of it as well, which I don't know if you can see on camera, but it'd be nice if you can. The face is milky quartz. The center of the skull, running down the middle, is clear quartz, and the back of the skull is actually smoky.
Wow.
So they've actually carved the skull on purpose to operate in a certain way optically. So when you start putting all the factors together, yeah, this is not new. It's pre-Columbian, so that means it's maybe 500, 600, 700 years, maybe older. And the artistry in it, the way they've put it together, is beyond what they would bother to do now. And there aren't any machine marks on it. I've gone over it with a fine tooth comb, and I can't find any marks on it at all. So there we have it. As far as I know, he's a real one because he was one of the 13. So there we go. What a way to start the show.
What is the original story on knowing that there was skulls around the world and that there was 13? So do you know the original story of how this all started?
It goes back to an archaeologist called Mitchell Hedges, hence the Mitchell Hedges skull. And he was out there in Belize in the 1930s. And it coincidentally happened to be his adopted daughter's 14th birthday. So this is honestly the truth. So he kicks the daughter out and he says, look, go off and have yourself an adventure. Don't go too far. Just go and explore. She's exploring the ruins in Belize, and she goes into this temple, and the altar stone's collapsed. And she goes around the back of the collapsed altar stone and picks up the top part of the Mitchell Hedges skull. So she takes that back to her dad, and her dad's like, whoa, where did you get that from? That's incredible. She said, well, it's this temple over here. She leads him back to the temple. And when they go around the back of the altar and actually start to clear the debris and the rubble and start to do a little excavation in there, they come up with the jaw piece. Now, her name was Anna Mitchell Hedges, and she only died in 2007. And right to her dying day, no details of that story ever changed. She never wavered at all. That is the story. So a lot of people have attacked it and said, oh, maybe it was just, planted there to, so she could find it on her birthday and all this, that, and the other. No, a dad has no sense of humor at all. You can tell as an archaeologist, he's straightforward, science, exploration, that's what he is. He's not that kind of a joker. And the more you look at the Mitchell Hedges skull, it's still with the family now. They've never surrendered it, but they have, like you say, subjected it to scientific tests. At that point, the rest of the world kind of lit up. Everyone was like, well, if there's one, there's probably more. Mm-hmm. The other argument, which is nonsense, and this is a personal story, is most people have said, well, oh, it's a one-off. There aren't that many of them. They're just, they're copies. They're made by locals, this, that, and the other. If you go to the ballpark at Coba, which is one of the biggest partially excavated temple sites in South America, if you go into the ballpark, there is a white quartz skull embedded in the floor in the center of the ballpark. It's still there, exactly where it was found. And there's no doubt about it whatsoever. It's in the archaeological record. That's where they dug it up, and it's still there. So this idea that, they're all fakes in this, that is just not the complete truth. I think what's happening is they're trying to stop people now from picking these things up and nicking them and spreading them all over the world and that. Because I know that just outside Mexico City, they were excavating a tomb there, and they came up with a reasonable sized one, probably a bit smaller than mine, but a reasonable sized one there. That isn't even in the archaeological record. They've stopped anybody from getting at that one. So I've not seen any photographs of it. And that only came up about 15 years ago. So they are still turning them up. They just won't tell anybody where they are because they're national treasures now to South America. If I ever got the chance to take this chat back, I probably would. So if anybody out there's listening and you come from South America and you want the skull back, put me in contact with the local museum, and they can have it back. But I very much doubt anybody will.
There you go. Now, Sober Carper asked, is there aware of any other sets of skulls or similar, perhaps made from different elements?
Well, as I said when we came in, there are tens of thousands of them. But the ones that are really important, most of them are sat in museums. Okay. So the important collection of quartz crystal skulls, most of them trace back, believe it or not, to a guy in the 1830s, who had a shop in Paris. And this guy's name was Boban. And what he used to do was sell South American antiquities. That's what he did. He imported them from museums. So I think there's 2 in the Louvre, which came through him. There's 1 in the British Museum, which again, I think came from him, which is quite an interesting one. And then there's sort of other museums all over the world that have them. The common denominator being that they are all made of quartz. The British Museum one used to make me smile, though, because they had it in a nice, neat little cabinet all of its own, and it just sits there and everyone's like, oh yeah, hey, you know, the famous crystal skull and this, that and the other. But what they then had to do was put shutters on it, because a couple of security guards got freaked out at night and actually left. They left the museum. I can't, you know, be doing with this skull anymore. So it shuts at night. They lock it in at night because they said the eyes would glow and they'd see blue energy coming off this thing in the middle of the night, you know.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
So the other skulls have got, I mean, this kind of answers the question. They have got properties. They've got things that happen with them. Do you want me to say why?
Yeah.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Well, when I was doing the book, the inspiration for the book was lockdown 2020. I didn't have anything else to do. So I went off and buried myself in all this science and what have you. And then the scientific discoveries at that time that were coming out about 5 years ago, they discovered that obviously they knew anyway that quartz has this electrical piezoelectricity quality, because you can power a wristwatch off a quartz crystal by squashing it. If you crush it, it'll pulse back, and it pulses back in a regular way. So they knew that there was an actual electrical quality to it. So somebody's actually Kirlian photographed some of the crystals. You'll find these images of bolts of lightning and whatnot coming off them because they are energized. Now then, this is where the energy side of it starts to come in. Somebody decided, I can't say which paper because it appeared in Nature magazine in the 1990s, but somebody decided they were going to have a look at why planet Earth doesn't seem to work when it's given an iron core. So they computer modeled the planet, okay? Brilliant, accurate, super computer model. And they kept changing the elements for the Earth's core. Well, after a few months or whatever, somebody said, well, you know, we're running out of options here. The paradox is called Olson's paradox. You've got to try and get it to work the way it works in reality. And nobody had solved this Olson's paradox. So they said, oh, anybody thought of trying quartz? Let's try quartz. What happens if you put quartz in? So they put quartz in as the Earth's core. And then they discovered that started to get a result. So they went even more specific and they put amethyst in as the Earth's core. Bingo. They solved Olson's paradox. So the entire reason why the Earth works, why it's got all this electricity, why it's electrical, your gravity, your magnetism, all the rest of it, is that it is a giant crystal ball flying through space. That's what it is. So when you start to look at that, all of a sudden your head goes, because everything that's around us that's crystal, you know, the quartz crystal is more common than soil. You know, it's more common than basalt. It's in everything. It's in the computer we're talking through now. It's in my glasses. It's in the windows, you know, it's everywhere. It's in sand. It's in cement. It's, you know, everywhere's full of this stuff called quartz, and it's electrical. You know, it's a super, super special material. You know, it goes all the way back to the creation of planet Earth. It's the actual ball that we're sat on, you know. That was just, what a discovery, you know. And then you start to think, well, you know, these guys that came up with the idea of using it for skulls, what kind of super technology were they aware of? You know, what was it that they knew that took them to choose that as the substance for making a skull? Then it gets really interesting, because where do you think you find silica in the human body? If you don't have enough silica in the body, the skull and the brain doesn't develop. It's the most important substance in a baby to develop, the skull and the brain. So how on earth, you know, thousands, hundreds, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of years ago, how did they know that these beggars, these skulls, real human skulls, don't function without silica? And how did they somehow realize that the ball side of this, that's the planet, that's what we're on, that's what's flying through space, you know? And they
Wow.
always say the devil's in the detail. And wow, that is some detail for me. That really is. So when you see all these weird effects that you get with quartz, and they talk about all the different things that quartz can do, that also applies to flint. It also applies to obsidian. It applies to lots of other things that have quartz in them. The extra additives just change the quality slightly. I mean, there'd have been no prehistory without flint. Everything's made of flint in prehistory. So it's a super, super important thing.
Wow.
See, a lot of people think skulls are evil and nasty and creepy. So why did they pick a skull instead of crystal hands or something like that?
Well,
Why a skull?
because I was doing it during lockdown, one of the publishers I work for, he said, I want a really significant book that's all about, life and death and all this, that and the other. So I did what all archaeologists do, and I just kind of scurried off and started looking at extinction events and things like that, And then it suddenly dawned on me that the one thing that every single human being that's ever lived has got in common is the head, the skull.
Mhm. Mhm.
And all the races, it doesn't matter how far back you go all the way back to flipping Neanderthals, they've still got skulls. There's still, it's the bit that we all interact with, the face and the features and in the old days, in the days before science, hang on. Oh, it's a bit dusty today. In the days before we had science, they believed that the soul, where we go, the soul's in here, heart and soul. Well, back in the day, it was up here, because you've got your sight, your smell, your taste, and speech, and your hearing, and everything. Your window to the world, your processor, if you like, your supercomputer, is all sat in the head. So. That's why the Celts were into chopping off heads, because if you cut off the head of your enemy, you'd got your enemy. He couldn't pass over to the next world. He couldn't go to the next life because you've got him. If he's sat on the shelf and he's still there, he's a bit dried and looking a bit crinkly, but you've still got him. He can't go anywhere because you actually captured him. And that thought runs right through so many ancient civilizations. It's the whole beheading game and all that, everything that's there in legend, it's all to do with the fact that the soul resides in the head. That's where that comes into play. So that kind of plays into crystal skulls. I mean, they have this idea that maybe human sacrifice, which happened a lot with the Aztecs, maybe when they're doing that, the priest would hold the skull up, the crystal skull, so that the sun comes through it, and somehow it's reflecting life on Earth and soul life, and it would have looked spectacular. There's no doubt about that when they light up. That we'd still do it now. You put sunlight through anything that's made of crystal, and it seems to come alive. But just a quick warning to folks: do not leave crystal balls on your windowsill, because they are capable of starting house fires.
Right.
If the sun gets through that, don't leave one on a stand on the window, whatever you do. You could leave it there for moonlight, but just don't let sunlight go near it.
Yeah, like a magnifying glass.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's what it is, yeah. In fact, that's one of the uses they put them to. The Celts had these crystal balls, which they mounted in holders into harnesses, and they would carry them with them. And then on a sunny day, it only takes a few seconds to start a fire. Yeah, and that's what they were. They were firelight.
Just like in was it Romans where they had the death ray?
That was the Greeks. Yeah, the Greeks had that.
Yeah, the Greeks.
Was it some Euripides or something, or Euclides or somebody came up with this? Yeah, this laser beam, and he was setting fire to ships. That was a combination of a mirror and a lens, and it could focus the beam. Yeah, he won a battle. I think it was Athens. Was it a famous battle for Athens or something? He burned all the ships. Yeah, I remember that. That's funny enough. That one's not in my book.
Now, Shelley Montgomery asked earlier, who decided on the 13 skulls, or who came? Is there a committee? Is there scientists, archaeologists? Who said that these are the original 13 or authentic, or how do we do that?
Well, I think the original book, I think it's Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. And I've got it in my head that he did a TV series, and the book was published, I think, in 1980. So the skulls that were available at the end of the 1970s, there was only a small number of them. And there still is. I mean, if you rule out all the modern copies, you are left with probably less than 20 skulls, of which I could only find maybe less than half a dozen that seemed to have any age to them. So the whole idea of crystal skulls seems to come out of that movement in the late 1970s, 1980s. But it was whatever was available at that point in time. That's who decided on the originals, which again, I suppose, gives them some history. So that it's the history that defines, what the original 13 were.
Wow. Huh. I see Tartar Sauce said when you were talking about beheading and having a person so they couldn't cross over, and he said except for the blemmies. And if everybody ever watched our show, the blemmies are the ones at the head and their chest.
Yeah, down here. Yeah,
they have no head, so they have no skull.
So you can't chop their heads off because
I
mean, the other
maybe their heads were already chopped off and then they developed into blemmies.
I mean, the other thing about chopping someone's head off, and people probably don't realize this, back in the days in France when they used to, guillotine and axe and this, that, and the other, they used to leave the head on a shelf in a particular room, mortuary room, for 3 days because the eyes would still follow movement up to 3 days after.
Oh,
so that is super creepy. If people like real, it's a reflex reaction. Apparently, it's the nervous reaction, till rigor mortis and rot sets in. Can you imagine that, walking into a room of heads and all the eyes go, Oh, that's creepy.
Wow.
Wow.
That would be creepy.
So yeah, when I started doing this book, another thing that got my attention were these fellas. I'll just bring them in. That's the family of Akhenaten. These things, these super elongated skulls.
Right.
And I started looking at them because, funnily enough, a lot of the cultures that have those elongated skulls, there's another load of them.
Wow.
A lot of them are producing these crystal skulls. A lot of them come from South America. You've got Paracas skulls. A couple of them on there, though, come from southern Russia. And these guys were all over the entire world. So that took me down the whole, gigantic head route. Also, it kind of floats into alien territory as well. The idea that they have these bigger heads. I came up with an interesting observation, though, because if you've got a head that's three times bigger than one of ours, that means you've got a brain that's 3 times bigger than one of ours. And I just had this wonderful idea, that some guy kind of, opens the door to a room and there's like loads of these guys sat around with the big heads. And he kind of walks in and he goes, right, lads, I want to build a pyramid. How do I build a pyramid? And like 10 seconds later, somebody's gone, there you go. That's how you do it. Because these guys are supercomputers, Imagine somebody like that being born, say, with the kind of faculties that Einstein had. Archaeology has problems because very often we're dealing with what's not there. It's something that's missing that causes the problem. And this whole, aliens built Baalbek because there's, a 300-ton block halfway up a wall, and aliens built pyramids, because that's the only way they could shift the blocks and all this, that, and the other. Not necessarily the case, because these guys with these enormous heads would have been absolute geniuses. They would have excelled in everything, absolutely excelled. It's interesting, actually, because the back of the brain as well deals with spiritual functions and creative functions. So these guys must have been absolutely, literally out of this world. So when you start putting them back in, when you put them back into the equation and the areas that these things appear, I mean, they've even got stretched heads in China, lo and behold, they've got pyramids in China. So what we're looking at is another species. I think we're up to 32 different species now of human beings that have come out, Denisovans and, Heidelbergensis and Homo sapiens, which are us. There's so many of them, Homo floresiensis, which are little tiny ones, Neanderthalis, the Neanderthals, and so on and so on. This list just goes on. I had about 8 or 9 in the book when I did the book, but we're up to silly numbers now because people are looking for them, these extinct races. So the world, it's not been survival of the most intelligent, I think, with us. It's survival of the warrior. We're the warriors. The rest of them have gone. They've all disappeared. We're the last of our diversity. It's all come down to us. But what they were capable of, I'm writing the book and I'm thinking, making a crystal skull isn't a problem if you know how to do it. These guys were just, phenomenal, brilliant. And again, back to the electrical qualities of planet Earth. They were creating pyramids to, manipulate electricity in ways that, that we just don't know how to do it. There's a great story, actually, when you look at things like that, because the Baghdad battery, everybody knows about the Baghdad battery. Yeah, it's this clay jar found outside Baghdad. It's around about 400, 500 AD. It's got a copper core in it. You fill it full of acetic acid and it generates about 3.5 volts. So everybody at this point is like, yeah, I can deal with that. Yeah, maybe they were, just doing things with it. But what they don't tell you is when these things were excavated, they were in rows, lots of rows. There were hundreds of them, not just one, but hundreds of them in rows, capable of generating enough electricity to blow someone to bits. These things, they were all joined together and they were generating tens of thousands of volts. So that changes that picture. They knew what they were doing and they were messing about with some very, very serious electricity. The other side of it is, in Dendara, there's this, Egyptian light bulb. I'm sure you've seen Eric Von Däniken do it. They recreated it and got one lit up. Well, that also answers how they managed to paint the roofs on tombs in white without getting any smoke on them. So if you actually have a look online, you have a look at these beautiful, amazing Egyptian, tombs, and they're hundreds of feet underground. Not a chance of getting light in there by using mirrors and things like that. But there's not the trace of soot anywhere. No soot. Don't know what the hell they were burning if people think they were burning stuff. But there's no heat damage, no soot, nothing. They must have had another source of light. They were using something else. There are legends as well. In certain jungle tribes of them having rocks that would light up that they could put on poles, and they used to light trails with them, these glowing things. And even the Celts knew that if you had enough quartz and moonlight got on it, it would fluoresce under moonlight, so you could see it. It's fantastic, actually. I'm throwing a few in here that are not in the book. If you go to Pompeii, where they're still excavating, they very recently excavated one of the roads in Pompeii and discovered that all the way down the middle of the road, a cat's eyes made of quartz. So the idea of separating traffic by having, white light up things in the middle, that's not new. The Romans were doing that 2,000 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
Using
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's very, very recent discovery. They're little diamonds made of quartz, and they're set into the volcanic surface of the road because it's all made from volcanic basalt. They've got these little white triangles all the way up because they light up at night.
Wow.
So these crystal skulls, since every civilization seems to have had one, what are the main cultures that had them? Like you said, the Aztecs, and there's a little bit on Jason Aztec face. So is there other races or entities that have carved these skulls besides Aztecs?
Yes, basically, yes. It seems to have gone in two directions, actually. Pretty much the whole of South America, you'll find them. They're there in one form or another, but that's because of the death cults. They were obsessed with this idea. They had skull racks. They used to pile skulls up, they carved them. So it was kind of logical that led to sooner or later somebody made one out of quartz, and that's how they got there. But there are crystal skulls that have turned up elsewhere. I think they've had them in Russia. I think they might have had them in Egypt and North Africa. So they're not limited solely to South America, but the South American ones are the famous ones. Mostly because of where you get crystal from. Okay, you've got to have a big enough lump of rock to be able to, carve it all the way down to get something that's a life-size head. That having been said, though, the idea of the skull, the idea that the soul lives in the skull, skulls, as you said, representing death and the afterlife as a reminder that we're all mortal, that is universal. That is pretty much right across the whole planet. The other thing that's most shocking that's right across the planet are the guys with the stretched heads. They're everywhere. They're in every single culture. And the other thing that's quite shocking, they were trading them out of Russia into Europe in medieval times. So they were on the European continent. They were there, 700, 800, 900 years ago. They were still alive. There was a fashion for trading women with these elongated heads into Europe. And then, of course, in South America, they only died out when Columbus got there, and the rest of the Spanish and other conquistadors. That's only about 400 or 500 years ago. So we're looking at a tremendously recent extinction. What these guys could have told us. You look at the Paracas skulls, for example, and they're still covered in organic material. They are very recent burials. They're also genetically completely different from us. The hole at the back is in a different place. They don't necessarily have the sutures. The facial features are different. Obviously, the size of the skulls are enormous. There's this argument as well. I came up with two things. One of the things that's universal is the guys with the big heads are everywhere. The other thing that's universal is that our species, tried to copy them. So you either get natural enormous heads or you get stretched heads. You get heads that have been artificially deformed to make them bigger. So the people that are doing that seem to think that they're gaining something by doing it. There's a benefit to it. And the people that are doing it are also ending up with people in high office. So if you have a big head, you're one of these hyper intelligent mega beings, you're going to rise up the social scale and end up sort of fairly high up. But, and this is what I'm coming to, the Paracas are giving birth to newborn babies with giant skulls.
Oh.
Yeah, nothing to do with stretched heads.
Yeah, so it wasn't any kind of binding or anything.
No, there are two very distinct, very different ways of dealing with this. Obviously the biological version is going to be superior, but that is absolutely, that's the truth. That's what they don't seem to be telling anybody, because everybody runs around going, oh, it's stretched, it's cranial deformity, it's cradle boarding and this and that. No, hang on a minute, no, there's some of them are born that way. Wow. Genuinely. I don't think I've got any photos of kids, actually. I don't think I put any in. I might have one.
So the one skull skeleton in was it Mexico that had an elongated head that they kept calling the Star Child or some kind of alien?
Yeah, that's Star Child's an interesting one because it hasn't gone that way. It's not gone vertically. Star Child has ballooned. So you've ended up with a sort of orb, if you like, a round head with little tiny eyes. They don't know, because I don't think the DNA has survived. They don't know if that's hydrocephalus, which is a condition that causes the head to swell.
Okay.
But the reason they think it might have been is that the head will swell equally over most of it. And a lot of the biology involved in that particular skull is recognizable. You can see it's got the sutures and it's got everything in the right place and what have you. But the giant ones I showed you on camera a minute ago, they're not the same. They are very, very much not the same. Very, very different skulls indeed. I've got loads of images, actually. I just don't seem to be able to find any in the book. Oh, I'll tell you what I have found, just while I've got it here. Do you remember I said there was one in the middle of the ballpark in Coba?
Yes.
There he is.
Wow.
Now, I actually took that photo, and you can see they put a metal rail around it so people don't tread on him.
Yeah.
But, that is, there he is, and it's life size. It's made of white quartz. So again, half of what I'm doing in this book is I'm trying to get rid of the nonsense that people talk about. Oh, it can't be possible that it's a fake. It's done this. No, this is the real thing. Just so one of those.
Now, some of the Egyptians had elongated heads, right? Some of the kings and queens.
That's the family of Akhenaten. That's the one I mentioned earlier. That actually, I think, is Akhenaten. Yeah, they've got stretched heads. But that top one there, this one here, this one, that is just bonkers. I've seen that in the museum in Cairo. It's one of his daughters, and it's easily twice the size it should be, and these are not cradle boarded. These are bred this way. This is how they arrived. And again, rising to a position of authority. They were a pharaonic line. They became pharaohs. There's some interesting evidence that they might have European origins as well, which might kind of point to where some of these heads are coming from. I'm trying to find out.
If you over time through generations, if you keep binding your head through your generations, will eventually that will become part of your DNA, or how does that work?
No, it always defaults back. This is if you talk to the guys who are actually doing the analysis on the Paracas, the guys in South America, if you speak to them, they'll spend an hour telling you how different they are genetically. I covered it. It's quite a few pages actually in the book that cover all the genetic differences, and it's not something that you can artificially replicate because it's in the DNA. So, I mean, nobody was engineering DNA 500, 600, 700 years ago. Nobody was messing with it back then. You can't even interbreed to get it to happen. It doesn't, because we're the dominant species, if you know what I mean. So if you try to breed, you try and do anything, it just breeds out. You've got 2 generations and it's gone, which you kind of see that with Akhenaten, because Akhenaten's got this whopping great big head, absolutely enormous head. And then you've got all his children, and obviously the queen has a big head as well, but the children's heads are a little bit smaller, till eventually you get to Tutankhamun, and yeah, he's still got this weird shaped head, but he's the smallest of them all. He's only like half a time, again, bigger than you would expect. But then also he has other genetic problems. Recently it's been discovered that, he had a deformed foot. He might have spoke with a lisp. There's various other things wrong because of interbreeding. They were interbreeding to try and preserve that line, and it failed. 3rd, 4th, 5th generation gone. It's a daft idea to marry a sister, and things like that, which is what they used to do. So no, there isn't any other way other than good old nature.
Okay.
No other way really of doing it.
Do you know of any skull that's maybe famous or discovered in North America over in our country?
Yeah. The Native American Indian cultures did a lot of cradle boarding. Actually, I've got some great pictures. Here we go. That one's South America, but that's North America. So that's one of the Native American tribes people. They've got a funny name as well. Let me just try and. Yeah, they're known as the Flathead tribe. So that's rather original title, the Flathead tribe. So, so a huge number of tribes were, engaged in cradle boarding, stretching heads. But at the same time, alongside of these were the guys with the enormous heads and the girls with enormous heads. And this really is the key to understanding how the two cultures were copying. You had the real thing and then you had the copy. And, it's Homo sapiens sapiens that's trying to copy them, which is what you see in that picture. I mean, the other picture is interesting. I put that in because that's from the 1930s. And that's South America and the cradle boarding. I was over there about 20 years ago, over in South America, and I got talking to the tribes people over there. And I said, well, cradle boarding, that was banned long ago. You're not allowed to do that by law. And of course, they just laughed and they just went, no, we still do it.
Right.
Native American traditions, they're still doing it. So there are still, somewhere out there in the jungle, there are still people with these enormously elongated, I mean, they're not proper, genetically that way, but they've still got big heads. And I'd love to find out how that changes people. What changes does that bring about? What makes them different, Because the brain gets bigger and bigger and expands. The more space you give it, the better it works, the more it functions, So what is the difference? Where does that take us? I never got the answer to that because that was all they tell me, that they're still doing it, and that's that.
And here I am.
So no wonder we're dumbed down. We have small skulls.
Yeah, I was gonna say, here I am sitting with this a normal sized average head. Jeez.
Well, yeah, it's funny because the archaeologists, say, oh, we can always tell how intelligent the species was because of the size of the cranial cavity. And then you get all these stupid reconstructions that drive me up the wall. You got Neanderthals and they all look like monkeys. They're all, ridiculously stupid looking. And then all of a sudden you discover, hang on a minute, the cavity in a Neanderthal skull is bigger than ours. So what could they do? you know, because they had more space. Their cavity was bigger than ours. So by scientific logic, they should have been more intelligent than us, not less, you know. Not sure about Homo floresiensis. I mean, if you're only 3'6" tall, you know, you're going to have a head about the size of a brain about the size of a tennis ball. So I'm not really sure where that would take us.
They said some of the dinosaurs may have had like brains the size of peas. I mean, that's what I hear, but I don't know if it's true or not. Walnuts, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole brain issue actually has become a bit of a kind of an argument now, because in human beings we have a brain which functions inside our head, but the nervous system then drops into the body, and the heart is now recognized as a second brain. Well, that, when it comes to dinosaurs, that causes lots of problems, because does that mean that little tiny pea is the only operating center in the animal? Maybe not. You know, maybe there is more to it than that. I mean, some of the dinosaurs come out as being quite incredible when you start to look at them. I was watching Jurassic Park the other day, in Jurassic Park 2, we've got them being repeated over here. So I think that might be closer to the truth than we know.
Wow. What about our ancestors? Do you think they had bigger craniums than we did? Have we lost brain space and skull size as we, like, from us to our grandchildren and our great grandfathers? Is there a difference in sizes?
I think genetically, each species stayed fairly consistent over time. So, like, you know, there's a certain amount of variation in our species of height, weight, you know, and all the rest of it. Well, you know, in the other species, it would have been the same. You'd get bigger Neanderthals, smaller Neanderthals, bigger guys with stretched heads, smaller guys with stretched heads, you know. Mind you, it might help to solve the riddle of the giants, because I think there were giants. I think there was a species that was 30 or 35, 40 foot tall. But then you can also say, if these guys with the stretched heads are walking around, if one of those blokes is 7 foot tall, but he's got an extra 1.5 feet of head, that's going to take him straight away up to nearly 9 foot tall without any trouble whatsoever. So it also kind of feeds into the whole issue of giants as well. Not just as a species, but how big some of these other species were, you know. The thing with Neanderthals is they're described as, like, you know, if we're industrial diggers, then those blokes were bulldozers. You know, they're huge fellas. They're really big, muscular structure on a Neanderthal. They'd have flattened us without even thinking about it. I think what kept us going, like I said, is warriors. We were kind of clever in that department. We were good in the survival thing. It has a sad side to that, though, because when archaeologists have studied the areas that early Homo sapiens moved into after the Ice Age, the consistent pattern that gets repeated is that all the other species are wiped out.
Oh.
So we are a threat, basically. You know, wherever we go, we take out any of the opposition, and then we tend to take out the higher predators, and then start to, you know, damage the environment as well. And that can be shown now archaeologically and scientifically. That's basically what we do. So a lot of these species haven't gone naturally. You know, some of them have gone through conflict, persecution, trading, misuse, you know. The way I tend to think of the brain thing, because there was another kind of question implicit in that, I think that the brains they had in the past, they put to different use.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. So some little bloke sat in his village in, like, you know, 8000 BC, and he sat there in India, and he suddenly invents the atom bomb, and the atom bomb goes, and the whole village just goes and turns to glass. Now, that's true. That's out there. You can actually go and find it. There's a whole village out there there's been an airburst of some kind, and it's turned everything to glass. And all the people, the skeletons and the objects and everything are just stuck exactly where they were at that moment of explosion. And there is a center to that as well. So it could have been some guy mucking about in his garden shed, and it's gone off and bang. And then this is where the difference comes. They don't suddenly go, oh, we could use this as a weapon. What they do is they go, this is a really stupid idea. We're not going to do anything else with it. We're just going to lose the technology. Let's just get rid of it. Let's forget it ever existed. And they just, you know, move it away, out of the way. That's the kind of decision-making process. Anything that damaged the earth or damaged the environment or damage their survival capacity, because that's what it was all about back then. Anything that was dangerous, it didn't matter whether they knew about it or not. They just didn't use it for those purposes. They didn't do that with it, clearly they knew how to get up in the sky. There's so much, ancient information that supports, flight at a very early date, but they didn't use it the same way that we use it. They just went up there, did whatever they wanted to do, and come back down again. No damage. I think that's what we've lost. We've lost this idea of protecting the whole environment. I did another book called The Green Man, Revealing the Green Man, and I really go into it big style in that, and I kind of show how in ancient days they had this idea that the planet and everything on it and greenery, etc., had its own separate consciousness. So this whole idea that we're running around like fleas on the back of a dog, that concept is perfectly valid. That's how they viewed it in the past. Not now, because we're still conquering. We're still going out there and subduing the earth, and there's more radiation around now than there's ever been, and there's all these problems coming up because we're just not making the right decisions. And it really is that's what comes out when you start going back in time. You suddenly realize that they were perfectly capable of doing everything that we can do. They just chose not to.
Do you think the previous civilizations, getting back to like the elongated or big craniums, do you think they had special abilities that we've lost, whether it's telecommunication, telepathy, anything like that?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. I do a section in the book about the brain and what the brain's capable of doing. And then you look at all the different areas, because we've been around long enough now scientifically to understand what most of the brain does. And there's a couple of bits we're not quite sure of, but you get the idea. The next thing is what happens if those areas are bigger. And obviously these guys with the huge heads, they're not just bigger, they're enormous. They're huge. And it does raise this question about telepathy and being able to see the future and the past and concept of time. What abilities could they see in the world around them that we don't see because we're just not wired that way? Now you are into the last section of the book, because I do look at alien heads. I look at the idea of aliens, and I come up with an interesting conclusion. I'm going to blow the end of the book for you live on air here, because the process led me to thinking, well, there's a problem with aliens. People are going, yes, these are people from the future. They're coming back to put everything right and save us all, and this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. They just look like people with stretched heads. They're coming out of vehicles. They're coming out of craft. What happens if way, way, way back in the distant past, somebody solved the problem of traveling in time and space? So for the guys in these vehicles, time and space is totally irrelevant. It just doesn't matter. They can go anywhere they like to any point in time. Where would they go? I know where I'd go. I would get in one of these craft. I'd go to the end and have a look where it ended up. Where is it going? You can see the logic, can't you?
Right.
Okay, well, this explains abductions, cattle mutilations. They're nicking all different species of animals. They're interfering in that way. They are seriously having a look at where we're at, what's happening. They're analysing the world as it is now. But most importantly, it solves one of the time travelling problems, because if you go back in time, you can do damage. You can screw up your own time to the point where you cease to exist. Whereas if you're going the other way, if you're going forward, there's nothing left to ruin. You can't do any damage because you're just observing where things are anyway. That's how they've ended up. So they've solved that problem as well. They're not coming back in time. In fact, technically, they're not coming from anywhere at all in time, but they're not messing about with the timeline. There's no problem with that. They're just popping up to have a look where we are. Why not? If these... there's a story that somebody told me years ago. They said Noah's Ark. Everyone thinks Noah's Ark was like, a block of wood full of stinking animals and poo, and it floats across the ocean. And it, no, our 2 millenniums that we've had to develop has brought us to this point. Before Noah's Ark, there were 3.5 millenniums for them to get to where they were in technology. So why couldn't they have DNA and genetics and, carry animals that were asleep, and and there's just so many possibilities. They could probably do in Noah's day, prior to the flood, more than we can do now, and probably do it better because they'd had longer. They'd had 3 times the amount of time that we've only had 2 of.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it does change the way you look at things. So all these people now that are running around going, oh, Atlantis, Lemuria, and all, Pangea, and ancient sunken civilizations, all this and the other. What you've got to do is realize that things are not evolving. They're not getting better. They're actually devolving. Things are getting less and less and less, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So to reverse that, the further back you go, the more advanced it gets.
Yeah.
So that's the logic behind the concluding chapter, is that if you go all the way back, before the asteroid impacts, before the floods, before mass extinctions, before asteroids, before the ice age, go all the way back, way back as far as we can possibly go, things are going to get better, not worse. Then they're going to get more advanced, not more primitive. They go in the opposite direction. So quite neatly, what started out as a bit of an archaeological study into, DNA and species and crystals, and that, it ended up being, actually finishes with time travel. It finishes looking at where we've ended up, which actually it was appropriate to come out of lockdown, out of the whole pandemic, and come out of that situation with some kind of a conclusion along those lines, because that's what the evidence supports. None of us will ever live long enough for it to worry us. We'll be long gone before it ever gets to that point again, I think.
Think of what you could accomplish if you lived as long as they did in biblical times. 300 to 500 years, even all the way up to 1,000 years for Melchizedek.
Yeah, that figures into it as well, because again, you're taking out the idea that things rot. You're taking out the idea that things die. You're taking away the idea of natural selection, where things are out to kill you. You've only got to go to the jungles of South America, and everything, even the trees, want to eat you. It's like, honestly, it's incredible. Unless you've been there, you don't understand the truth of that statement. Everything wants to get you in one form or another. But that wasn't always like that. The whole survival paradigm and that, go back far enough and everything seems to have coexisted fairly well. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I keep thinking of the catacombs. Do you know if there's different shapes of skulls and elongated skulls down in any of the catacombs, or just normal shaped skulls?
Oh, now you're asking me to really sort of dive in archaeologically. Yeah, go on. Ooh, yeah, let's get radical. Let's get a bit radical and go. I'm going to go yes. Yes, I think there's no doubt at all in my mind that somewhere in those catacombs, in amongst the burials, somewhere in there will be guys with the elongated heads. Because like I say, they only disappeared. They only died out between sort of 400 and 500 years ago. So maybe 1 or 2 survived till 300 years ago, maybe. Some of them might have survived in different parts of planet Earth, but they're out there. And I know that people have dug them up on archaeological digs. I was on a medieval dig over here at a priory that was run by the Knights Templar. And it dates from, it's founded in 1070s, 1075, I think it was founded, or 1072. There were stretch heads on there. So it's like, oh, hang on a minute. We're talking knights in armor swanning round, medieval cloisters, and, it's like old Kingdom of Heaven and all that sort of stuff. And but no, there's a guy with this whopping great big bit on the back of his head, stretched. And there wasn't just one. I think we got about half a dozen skulls. And this is what's happening in Russia. Russia's a great one, because they put like new roads through, new infrastructure, and they have archaeologists like everybody else. They're digging up Genghis Khan's Huns, and the Huns have got these enormous heads, massive stretched heads. And that's where they were being imported from in medieval times. They were coming in through Europe from southern Russia. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Romans must have been intimately familiar, with these people, because they were everywhere. 2,000 years ago, they were all over the place. So they've got to turn up in the catacombs. They have to be in there somewhere. Right. All that's happening is people are finding them and making them disappear. because they don't fit the. There's a story over here in Wales. Somebody excavated a prehistoric cave in Wales. They got 16 of these enormous skulls out of this cave system, but they did it in the 1830s. And back then people were superstitious. So they kept all the normal skulls and threw all the big ones down a well. So I wish I had £1 for every time someone has told me that tale like that, it got thrown in a stone chipper, or it got crushed up, or it's in a box somewhere, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's somewhere in a warehouse that nobody ever goes to. They're out there. Absolutely. I don't, yeah. Maybe I shouldn't have said all of that, but I have. So tough luck. There you go. They're out there. They are definitely out there.
Wow.
Wow.
So what else haven't we covered yet in your book? Have we?
Well, what the book tends to do is I try and categorize each thing and then push it as far as it'll go. I think the only bit that we haven't really touched on is I do mention Tesla and his experiments with electricity. And then I really go into the whole electrical side of what quartz is capable of. That's interesting because I think that's going again towards the future. I think that was a whole shed load of technology that just got lost somewhere in the mix, and now it's coming back. It's being revived and looked at again. I was watching a thing on YouTube the other day, and first time I've ever seen it. Somebody actually said it. They put it up on screen in words. They said, human beings are walking piezoelectrical batteries.
Right.
I thought, wow, you would not have got away with saying that, 20 years ago. Nobody would have comprehended that at all. But I've been saying for a long time, we are literally, as above, so below. The planet works that way. Well, so do we. We are electrical. It first found favor in the movie The Matrix, where they have all these people like powering the alien superstructure, and they call them Papa Top. Well, that's based on the idea that human beings are batteries, that we're generating electricity all the time. And a lot of the new technology now that's coming out, things to do with engines and solar power and where we go from here with all that, a lot of that is based on different forms of electrical energy. They've just invented a suit, for example, that you can wear, and as you're walking along, you're generating electricity. The suit's collecting the electricity, and it'll power all sorts of things, So the science fiction is slowly becoming science fact, and I kind of touch on that in the book as well. But then is this something that we're now rediscovering that the ancients perhaps already knew? Where does the line fall in what we're coming up with now? I mean, Tesla is a Victorian, he's not modern. He's 200 years ago now, because he's in the 1800s, but he's doing things that clearly he got from somewhere else. That's stuff that other people had played with at the time. So Victorian is an interesting era because of the Industrial Revolution. They're getting their information from absolutely everywhere, and you don't always know where these people have found it. Where they've gone off, and as you mentioned, the death ray, the death ray, things like that. I mean, obviously they had far more back then than we've ever given them credit, but it weaves its way into what we've been talking about, in a sense that the Victorians had this idea of evolution. Everything's getting better, we're evolving, this, that, and the other. The past was always more primitive than the future. Nonsense, absolute rubbish. That's kept a lot of this technology down. It's stopped us from advancing for an enormous amount of time. It's not actually what Darwin said at all either. He wasn't really a big evolutionist himself. He came up with a lot of good theories. Some of them have proven to be true, but that wasn't one of them. So we're not evolving, we're devolving. And the stuff that's out there, the answer, Winston Churchill said it. He said, the further back you look, the further forward you can see. And absolutely true. And that's what we're seeing happening now. I think the lid's off. The cat's out of the basket now. That's it. People like Tesla and that, like Elon Musk at Tesla, they've took the bull by the horns, and they're like, no, we're not. We don't believe things were all that bad in the past. We're going to go and have a look. And they've gone back and they've started coming up with all this amazing stuff that we are rediscovering because it was there before. So tiny little book, but quite important. It's only small. It's not a particularly big one. Probably read it in 4 hours. That's it. It's all in there.
Now, Einstein was supposed to have had a larger brain, heavier brain than most average people. Do you think Tesla and all them had bigger heads, or did they just have a bigger brain mass inside our normal size head?
Tesla looked like he had a small head.
Well, the interesting thing is they've still got Einstein's brain because he left it to science and it's stuck in a lab somewhere in a jar. What they did discover is, though, that it is different. There are biological differences. But back to what we were saying earlier on, the biological differences in his brain are only quite small, but the end result was absolutely insane. What he was capable of from just those tiny changes, it's off the Richter scale. So imagine what some guy with 3.5 times that capacity's got, not just one brain, but 3.5 of them stacked one on top of the other. It totally alters your perspective of how the past, would have run. In terms of people like Elon, I've got an interesting theory here. The world is run by people that like to come up with isms, okay? And the big one is autism. Are you on the autistic spectrum? Well, I think what's happened is, if you time travel backwards, if you did that naughty thing and you went back about 200 years, there wouldn't be such a thing as autistic, because everybody would be like that. They would all be doing the sort of things that people like Elon Musk and other people do. And what's happened is, you said it earlier on, Jane, the dumbing down, dumbing things down. These people who are capable of super things, they can't add up the bus change when they get off their bus. They don't know how much money they've got in their hand, but they can sit at a piano and play every single composition Beethoven ever did perfectly. But that's no use, because that doesn't count, because it's no use to the 21st century. You see where I'm going with this? So there are people out there who can't read and can't write and can't do mathematics. That's because you don't need those 3 skills to stay alive. You don't need them. They're modern inventions, okay? What you do need is the ability to be able to feel if there's something hiding in the bushes 200 yards away that's going to come and eat.
Right.
You don't do that by sight. You just instinctively know that. You're radiating your body's energy out and you can feel it electrically. Some of the people who are autistic can do that. It's almost like magic, and all the things that they do. They can memorize what they have done every day for the last year. Because if you're out in the middle of nowhere and the only landmark is snow, you're going to have to remember how to get back, and where you're going to find food, and where you're going to be able to find the animals to hunt, and where your family is. And you're going to have to remember all of that, because that's what's going to keep you alive. Learning Pythagoras' theorem to 29 places is not going to keep you alive. It won't. And all those skills, those ancient skills, were still there right up till through the Industrial Revolution. And it's only in modern times that we've chosen to, look at mobile phones, look at the internet, and look at computers, and all of those skills have gone. They've disappeared. One of the best skills I've seen in recent times that made me smile, because I kind of joined the dots. There's a bloke in Africa, and he discovered, and don't try this at home, whatever you do, but he discovered that if he comes in contact with lions, for some reason, the lions really like him. So even if they're complete strangers they've never met, he will run towards the biggest lion and begin to communicate with the lion. And these lions fall over on the back and let him tickle the tummies. It's like big home cats. Well, that has got to be an ancient prehistoric survival skill. And somehow he's got it, and he's still alive, and he does it all the time. He lives in Africa. That's his particular skill. But you get enough of those skills racked up, and all of a sudden, you're living a different kind of life on a different level. Stick a big brain in there as well. Your computing power's gone up. Navigate by the stars instead of working on a wristwatch and what we do now. Learn what's happening in the seasons. Start to feel what's going on around you psychically, electrically. Start to communicate with animals and see what they're telling you, and all the stuff that's quote magic isn't. It's not. And all the stuff that we've built up around us as technology has just become like a sort of pink padded cell that we live in. It's taken us away from that prehistoric survival. I always used to say this. I used to say if the world comes to an end, the only people that will survive will be reenactors. These people that do Renaissance fairs and things like that. They're the only people that can still make a fire, and still bake bread and know how to make weapons that work, and things like that.
Right.
But they were the important skills. We're not just talking for 2 minutes either. They were the important skills for millions of years. Tens and tens of thousands of years they were important. And then every now and again, a civilization like the Greeks or the Egyptians or the Romans, they just throw a bit of technology in there. Let's do a bit of maths. Let's do Pythagoras' theorem. Let's do whatever. Chuck a bit of that in there. But that was never the primary intention. We still can't move the flipping stones that they put up just so they could see what the sky was doing. We can't actually move the blocks. They're too big. Right. We haven't got the means to do it. So clearly they were onto something that we've lost, And then, of course, you've got sound, you've got light, as well as electricity. You've got, what properties of the earth. There's so many things that they were aware of back then. And that's why I say now, this whole idea of being autistic, it's nothing to do with it being an illness or a disease. It's nothing to do with that. They are literally wired differently for a reason, If the world ever does come to an end, everyone that's autistic can come and join me, because I think we'd probably survive.
Your guy about the lions, I just read an article not too long ago about a same thing, but with sharks. There's a guy that can float out in the ocean and be out there for maybe 30 minutes, and all of a sudden, all these sharks that weren't in the area before, all of a sudden start coming in and brushing up against them. They don't attack them. They just start circling them and swimming around them.
Yeah, I've heard whales. I've heard dolphins. I personally have been out in the ocean where there's been some pretty big fish where people have sort of run away. I think the one particular one I remember was a tuna. It was a giant tuna. And I just happened to have some bread with me because I was feeding the normal fish. This thing comes in. It's huge. It's absolutely enormous. I don't know if anyone's seen a full-size tuna. They're not small. But then all it wanted to do was eat bread. I'm holding the bread over the water. This thing's taking bread out of my hands, jumping out of the water. No intention of attacking anybody or anything, And there's only me in the flipping ocean. Everyone else has run off. So it's a different world, different kind of existence,
What is your theory on when people say that maybe Tesla and all them was in tune with the Akashic records?
Wow, that's a massive blanket term. I try to break it down. I try to be a bit more specific, because when you say Akashic records, you start to actually ask people, is it something that's stored somewhere else that's psychic? Is it something that's stored inside us? Do we have a part of our brain or a part of our DNA that keeps information? Are we channeling it from beings elsewhere? You sort of need to
a lot of avenues.
Yeah, you need to bring it down a bit. Is there a library under the left-hand paw of the Sphinx? It's where's all this information coming from? Usually there is a physical source for it somewhere, but I'm also a huge fan of race memory. There's been at least 30 or 40 generations before us that have made us what we are now, and hundreds of generations before that have got us here. We wouldn't exist without all of the little bits of DNA that have come in. And despite what science says, they have still not got to grips with most of what DNA does and most of what DNA is. It's clearly some kind of, continuation from the past. So I'm quite a big fan of race memory, and that answers a number of issues. Where am I getting these voices from? Why do I think I was a servant girl to, Akhenaten back in Egypt? Why am I this, that, and the other? That would just totally blanket explain all of that, because the answer is yes, you are. It's in your DNA, But the number of people who think that they were Napoleon or Boadicea or whatever, that's a different issue altogether. There's something else going on there. Although it does have to be said that almost 30% of European males are descended from Genghis Khan, apparently.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
So this is kind of off subject, but kind of ties in. So people like Tesla, Einstein, all these great-minded people, do you think if they would have died during childhood or whatever, do you think somebody else would have took their place and still discovered the same technology? Do you think they're appointed for a time and place?
Well, the short answer is probably yes, but with there's a slight qualification to it, because we always focus on the discoverer, but actually maybe we should focus on the discovery, because those things that they've discovered were always there. They never went away. You know, everything that these famous people have discovered, it's been there forever. You know, it's part of planet Earth. It's part of what it is. What it takes is the right person with the right way of thinking and the right set of eyes to be able to spot that and then do something in such a way that everybody else gets it, you know, and understands it.
Right.
So I think in that sense, I think it's inevitable that sooner or later somebody in a given generation would pop up with those abilities to be able to do that. Worst part of it is that chances are more people are popping up like that who just never get discovered. You know, they disappear, they vanish into the woodwork, and things are lost. You know, wherever Tesla's lost diaries and lost papers went, you know, that half of Leonardo da Vinci's sketchbooks have disappeared. Nobody knows where they are. You know, they were destroyed. So we're losing more, you know, well, Library at Alexandria, you know, we're losing more information than we're gaining. But it doesn't mean that those discoveries have gone away. It just means that for a time, we don't have the eyes to see.
Yeah, we just have to rediscover it, or somebody has to be in tune with that, be able to put it to use.
Yeah.
Well, we're at an hour and 20 minutes. Is there any subject you want to hit before we go? Is there anything else you want to bring up?
Well, I've got a little friend here that probably wants to be featured. He loves to appear.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Aww.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah, look at that black and white skull.
Oh, he's yin and yang, actually. He's got a black spot on his white side, and he's got a white spot on his black side. But yeah, he always wants to get his face on camera. No, that was kind of, I always know when to round things off because he comes and tells me.
What's his name?
Stampy, because he stamps, you know, with his
Stampy.
He does that.
Aw, Stampy.
Stampy. Yeah, he's just settling down now. He'll be there for the rest of the night.
Awesome.
He kind of jumps up and he goes, Dad, it's time you shut up. You've said too much already.
Well, all right. Well, that's good. Well, at least we got a producer that's there taking care of the time for us. So, Stampy, thank you.
So, are we allowed to say where we're going next? Because I'm quite looking forward
Absolutely.
to
Actually, in our Rumble chat, Overbuilt asked if you had any paranormal or stuff going on in your house. So I wrote back to him in the chat saying, actually, that's our next show.
Yeah, you bet. Hey, so we're on the same frequency. We're on the same wavelength. That's good. That's definitely got to be the next show then. Definitely.
Yeah, we got him scheduled 2 more times, folks.
I will return.
Yeah,
we will return.
We got him in August, and what did we see? October.
Yes.
Yeah, we already got him scheduled for 2 more times coming up.
So our next show definitely would be about your haunted house and paranormal activity.
Yeah, and that's where I am now. This house.
Wow.
I'll be able to look around. I'll be able to tell you all the stories. I've got some great ones. The greatest thing, and I'll just put this out as a little trailer for it. The greatest thing is it doesn't follow the normal, regular. This is what a haunted house is supposed to be. It doesn't. And nothing that happens here is normal and regular either. It's very, very different. So it'll be an interesting show. It will.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Before you know it, it will be August.
Yeah, we're going that way.
Yeah, it's going by so fast.
Well, having said that, we'll just say goodbye to everybody in chat. Don't go anywhere, Mark. We'll talk to you after the show.
I'll stay.
Thank you all for coming. This has been awesome show about crystals and crystal skulls and archaeology and different races with different size skulls. It's been amazing. So thank you, Mark, for that subject.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Yeah. If anybody, I'll do my advert, get that out of the way. If anyone wants to contact me, I'm on Facebook. Anybody wants to have a look at anything I've done in the past, most of it's on YouTube. So you can go and watch that for binge watch it for days. And all the books, which there are 9 of, are all on Amazon. So that's it.
There you go. So yeah, please go over to Mark's Facebook page and check his books out on Amazon. And if you like anything, please go ahead and buy them and purchase them to help Mark out with finances for more archaeology and studies and history. And there's always a cost to everything, isn't there?
Oh, there is, but this kind of thing keeps me going. It really keeps me going. I think my purpose for being on Earth is just to try and get the truth out there. So I'm quite happy to do as many of these as possible.
There you go.
That's awesome.
So thank you, everybody in chat, hanging out, and we will be back again in some of our other shows. So look forward to those, whether it's a Wednesday night Night Owl Lounge hangout or whether it's next Sunday with our guest. Who'd you say it was, Jane?
Bryce. We have Bryce next week.
Oh, yes. Bryce from Esoteric Atlanta. And we're going to be talking about the Egyptian culture in North America.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So all of us here, thank you from Mark and us to everybody that's watching this and coming up, whether you're watching a rerun or you've been live here with us in chat. We love you. Thank you all for coming. I hope you guys have a good rest of your night and awesome week. We love you guys.
And much love to all.
Yeah,
keep looking up.
Keep your vibrations high.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right.